Ethical leadership in Nigeria, a possibility, a challenge, or a myth? Hello, and welcome to Step Up Nigeria's podcast. Our podcast is an initiative built to create awareness of governance issues that highlight the real cost of corruption and its impact on society. Our podcast is also targeted at helping to build a society with individuals filled with integrity who will build a nation that we all desire. My name is Feranmi Iyanda. I'm Director of Programs at Step Up Nigeria and I'm the host of this podcast. The topic for our podcast today is ethical leadership in Nigeria. Is that a possibility, a challenge, or a myth? We'll be dispelling this topic today, considering one of my favorite books, one of my favorite authors. Today we're going to be looking at A Focus on Lead Disruption by Dr. Akin Oke. Welcome, Dr. Akin.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, sir. Please introduce yourself for our listeners.
Okay, my name is Akin Oke, and I'm the lead convener at Leadership Express, as well as the co-founder for Easy Data Consulting Limited, both based in Abuja. The focus of our work, particularly around leadership development, is to equip leaders with the skills to lead well, lead effectively. So I like to say we work to make leaders have their best leadership self. And we've worked with quite a number of organizations in the past couple of years that we've started trying to change the narrative around leadership, particularly helping leaders to be more self-aware and to lead from a place of strength.
All right, sir. So thank you and welcome to Step Up Nigeria's podcast.
Okay.
I'm very excited to be discussing this with you today as I have read your book and I have spent some time learning from you.
Thank you.
Over the last couple of years. If you don't know Dr. Aki, anyway, we'll get to the fun part at the end. Nigerians are discussing leadership. You would very rarely enter a conversation when you don't hear our leaders are bad, our leaders are terrible, our leaders are wicked. How will we have good leaders? Only if we have good leaders. They are PhD thesis. It's a well discussed topic, but there's not much in terms of solutions and hope for young people who are looking at leadership as a way to improve the way that we live in Nigeria. And so that's really why we're here. Because of the leadership challenge, or will I say good leadership, because maybe we'll discuss if there's bad or good leadership, but there's a deficit of sort of leaderships who can govern well. And that has led to instability, insecurity, corruption, a decrease in the quality of living standards for Nigerians. And for a lot of young people, politics or leadership in governance is not something that is attractive by any standards. And leadership has also been linked to certain things that are not morally acceptable. So again, we'll be dispelling all of these as we move into the core of our podcast. So I think as we start today, tell us a little bit about your book, Lead Disruption. So why the title, what's it about, and how do we relate this to leadership in general?
All right. Thank you very much, again, as a Nigerian who has lived well over 5 decades being a Nigerian and in Nigeria, the issue of corruption and leadership, poverty, is one that I'm also very familiar with. And it goes without saying that if you have 10 Nigerians in one place and you are talking, inevitably it gets to the issue of poor leadership. Unfortunately, as a nation, we haven't paid attention to what I call leadership development. And a nation where leaders just emerge without some grooming, without intentionality about how to lead, cannot but find itself from time to time in the kind of situation we find ourselves with leadership. So the big challenge is leadership can be taught. Good leadership can be mirrored, can be copied, can be learned. But how well are we doing that? That's the crux of the problem that we've had over time. So coming back to my book, why did I write the book? So this book came from a place, I think around the COVID pandemic, 2020, when everybody was in a lockdown and it was increasingly difficult to get anything done. I started talking to a couple of leaders that we work with in the organizations that we engage and support. By the way, I'm also a certified leadership coach. And so part of my coaching engagement meant that I spoke with a lot of leaders from time to time and worked with leaders on some of the key pain points that they had within their organizations. And what this led to was a convening that we call Leadership Express, which was a monthly conversation with leaders to say, so how are you leading in the different areas where you are hold up? Some leaders were trapped abroad, their teams were here. Some were trapped in different parts of the country where they had to organize and work with teams across the country. And so that's where that came from. And the disruptions that brought to our life got me thinking about where the world was going. Because the level of disruption that we found during COVID was monumental. I remember at the time it was said that that's probably 1 in 100 years that you have that kind of disruption. And so as I was looking back on history, I realized that that was a seminal moment in the world because it heralded a sea change in the way that the world engages. And historically, every time there is a reorganization of the way we work as humans, we transit into a completely new paradigm, or what you call revolution.
Okay.
So we've now moved from the third industrial revolution into the fourth industrial revolution. Fully. 2020 was that point where we made a clean break. A lot of people don't still realize it, but the world we live in since 2020 is a completely different world than the one we had up to December 31, 2019. And so that's the history of the book. And I try to remind leaders, found a common theme in terms of the conversations we had, compile this into a quick guide. Because you see, you ask people about leadership, almost everybody has an opinion about what leadership should be, right? So this was just a short guide to say, remember all these important things, because this is what it takes to lead. It's not complicated. You just need to have the discipline to follow through.
All right. Thank you, sir. Quite interesting because as the world changes, how we lead must also change to fit the new environment. So our topic today is around ethics and ethical leadership specifically. How would you define ethical leadership?
So I'm always very careful with definitions because with definitions, you tend to get yourself boxed into a corner. And I always like to go for the simple things. Keep it simple. KISS, right? Ethical leadership or ethics in leadership is about doing what is right. Okay? Distinguishing between what is wrong and what is right. And this, at the end of the day, comes down to your morals. Now, we live in a world where relativism has taken over. What is right for you might not be what is right for me. Your truth is different from my truth. And suddenly we have so many ways that the world measures morality and what is good and what is okay. And so that's where the problem is with ethical leadership today. And so leaders, and in the book I wrote about self-awareness, you've got to recognize, so where are your anchors as a leader? What do you stand for? Who are you as a leader? Because again, when you come to Nigeria, like we've seen now, we've come to a point in our country where a lot of young people, particularly, have never seen things done right. At least I know 2-3 generations of young Nigerians who have never seen things done right. They cannot believe that this was the same country where if you cheated in an exam, you will be suspended. Right? You would even be ashamed to show up. When I was going to school in secondary school in the 80s, it was only the brilliant students that would stand up and be seen. Today, it's not the same. Society has almost flipped things on its head. And so you tend to reward mediocrity at the expense of excellence. And that's where things go south. And when you don't model the right kind of behavior, ethics becomes a serious problem.
Interesting thoughts. And I might digress a bit into what value systems sort of shape a leader and how that's important. So your book talks about self-awareness, like you said, resilience, empathy. How do the values or what a leader values sort of play out in their leadership style and execution? And why does it matter, really?
Okay. I think you answered a bit of the second part of the question. So when I say self-awareness, is the bedrock of effective leadership. It's this leader recognizing, who am I? Okay. Um, and I think it was Socrates that said the unexamined life is not worth living. Most people go through life without examining, who am I? And recognizing, for instance, what are my triggers? How will I respond? You see, when you squeeze, when lemon gets squeezed, produces lemonade. What is inside will come out under. So I used to joke with my team. I said Nigerians are not different from other human beings in the world. We respond to the same atmospheric conditions and pressures like everybody else, but there are conditions within society that makes people or leaders lead in certain ways differently. And if you don't create those kind of conditions, then it's difficult for leaders to even reflect on themselves. The challenge we have in terms of getting ethics right in our leadership is that because we are not intentional about grooming leaders, we don't even know what's inside of this leader by the time they already have access to leadership and power. Now, the danger with that in leadership and the way we study and teach leadership, by the way, is once someone has what I call the pecs of leadership, PERKS, it becomes extremely difficult for them to accept, to introspect, and to do what we call the inner journey, which is where you find out who you are as a leader. And so once they start to wing it and they're getting by with it, then it becomes a problem. Now, society doesn't help as well, because in our society, there are certain behaviors that we have attributed to leaders and we expect of leaders. And when you don't see that, then it becomes a problem. Like I was saying, society has certain cultural attributes that is expected of leaders, and that doesn't help in our case. So we have an element of culture that is called power distance. High power distance cultures tend to attribute and venerate leaders. And you can't question them. You can't fight them. Now, we came from all these places, urbans and kings and all that, right? Chiefs. And then you have low power distance cultures where between the led and the leaders, there's almost some congeniality. You would actually approach a leader. So it's a culture shock for someone like me to go to Europe, for instance. Many years I worked with a Dutch NGO, and I would walk in the Hague and meet members of parliament on their bicycles. You know, the prime minister on one occasion actually walked past him on the corridor in the Hague. Well, how does that happen here? Right? So when society also has those cultural elements, leaders must be even more intentional in terms of bridging that gap and recognizing that they could also fall prey to some of these ethical failures of leadership. So to answer your question, how can we get about this? It's been intentional about our leadership development. It's been setting time apart as a leader to reflect on who am I as a leader.
Thank you very much, sir. And when you speak about sort of self-awareness and I think identity, because we do have an identity crisis as well. Maybe not. I think of a lot of young people, young millennials, young Gen Zs who do not even know what it means to be a Nigerian, one, in terms of clearly defining what that means or what that looks like, but even defining who they are, almost like there's a purpose deficit due to external pressures and hardships in the society. So how early do you think this process needs to begin? And as you are aware, Step Up Nigeria has a Catch Them Young initiative that targets children as early as primary school in terms of instilling the right values required to lead with integrity. But how early should we start when we want to begin to speak about self-awareness?
As early as possible. I think, again, part of the problem is that leadership is such a wide subject. Everybody who has a title naturally assumes that they are leaders and they can lead without recognizing that if you miss certain steps in that leadership development journey, it will show up for that underline. So when I say immediately, there's something we call leader formation. Before you become a leader, you're formed. So things like what Step Up Nigeria is doing with Cat Them Young is trying to form leaders the right way, mold them. So when we've missed the step of leader formation, and we try to now send them on courses when they're already adults into leadership development roles, the boss has left the station. So that's the point where we often miss it as a people. So who does leadership development, leader formation? Starts from the home. Starts from our communities. How do we socialize young people into leadership, into leading themselves, right? And unfortunately, because these people you mentioned, Gen Z, millennials, they sometimes lack the right kind of models because of the sociology of the country at the moment. So there's a need for a social reengineering in terms of what kind of stories we are telling them, what kind of role models they see, what kind of behaviors we are tolerating or encouraging. Because some of them at this point, they are not even taking those decisions themselves. Some of these decisions are being taken for them by adults. When you find parents buying exam scripts, organizing special centers and codes, and then you produce these children who now have an entitlement mentality in the world, and then they become leaders in organizations. And then it's from this same leadership pool that you then elect them or they select themselves into positions of authority. So you see, it's quite a big change. So leadership development starts with leader formation. If you've missed the boss there, you can still catch up with intentionality, but it then becomes harder. Because by the time you're now sending them to all of these big name schools to go and learn leadership development, the boss has left the station. It's just a waste of time because they do not have the right values driving their leadership behavior going forward.
Okay, sir. So I'm going to ask you a controversial question in that scholars have argued both ways. Are leaders born or made? What's your personal opinion on that argument?
It's both, in my view. And that's my opinion, right? So some people come out and they just have a natural outlook on life that they can take on anything, they can get things done, they're doers. You need to shape those. Some come out and they need to be taught, guided, and given the tools of leadership. All right. And for someone like myself, as a leadership scholar, it's something that worries me when I see people who do all this leadership thing without having had the proper training to understand how to do it. So the fact that you've read a few leadership books does not make you a leadership development expert. For everybody in this age and time who has had a big title in some organization, in one shape or form, thinks they can do leadership, but they can't. Because it's a field that requires a proper understanding of some of these things that we're talking about. Right.
All right, sir. So what would you say are some of the major obstacles to leadership in Nigeria? What are those challenges that make leadership a bit difficult? Yeah.
So we've gone through a place in our history from when we had independence to date where we've had different kind of leaders. And I remember that a couple of years back when we were having some leadership training, I asked the question in the room, give me an example of a good leader from the Nigerian context. Most of the examples you guys gave back then were people that were even way before your time, right? The Awolowos of this world, the Ziks of this world. Now I'm asking, so are you saying in the contemporary time, there are no good leaders that we can find? So when you say, where are the obstacles? The key obstacle is we need to produce enough good examples that young people can see, that they can align with. Now, there's a lot of conversation going on. There's a lot going around it. But we're still short. And that's where we need to continue to have this kind of conversations to create opportunity for a critical mass of good leaders. So I'll tell you a story. When I was writing my PhD on leadership for my leadership program, and I wanted to do a research on how do you lead effectively in a dysfunctional environment like Nigeria. And I was going to do research, trying to find ethical leaders that you could trust that across the cross section of Nigeria, people will say, "Oh yeah," and we do have some of them. So for the first 2 months, I was creating a list, a long list, and I remember speaking with my one of my mentors then, who said, "Akin, we need to filter this. We need to have a criteria for measuring who is a good leader in the Nigerian context."
Yeah.
So we came up with some criteria and said this person's must have held office at the highest level, either as a minister or a governor or whatever within our space for a term, which is 4 years.
Okay.
They must have left office without even an allegation of corruption. They mustn't have visited EFCC, right? And we can see the changes, the reforms that they've made to improve the life of Nigeria.
Yeah.
I can't remember the many two. I think we also talked about the geographic spread and then the religious spread. So we had 5 criteria, critical criteria, to look at what's the expanse of their improvement that they've brought to our lives, right? And from a list of, so I started off with a list of almost 50 public sector leaders. By the time we filtered that list, we guess how many we came down with?
20?
Ambitious. We ended up with 15 leaders who had fulfilled that criteria. And when we started scrutinizing those 15 a little bit further, we ended up with, I think, a list of like 9. Because I was very particular to say, I can't present this with a leader on this list that somebody will say, this person slept in the EFCC last year or 2 years ago. And that's the challenge. Yeah. Where are those role models? They are there, but they are not the ones we amplify. Our society has found a way to amplify the worst of us over the rest of us.
The worst of us over the rest of us. Now, key question would be their pressures. So there are individuals who sort of have been formed in the right way, have those right ethical values, but then there's the societal pressure to conform to what the existing leadership norms are. And we hear about stories in the public service where organs resume a director position and they tell them, this is how we do it here. This is the norm and you must conform. Your book also speaks around leadership resilience as one of the key things that a leader must have. How does a leader build that resilience to be able to resist that pressure from the environment to conform to those negative leadership norms?
Seems like you've saved the toughest question for this one. It's a big challenge, I must admit. Having served in a public sector role for 2.5 years as an advisor, just sitting in the government office and just watching how people function. I'll say that this is the place of self-awareness. Even in the context and culture that we have, I'll tell you that from my experience, which is limited, by the way, the system still recognizes integrity. I have worked with a number of public sector officials in certain offices in government who still hold strong ethical conduct codes for themselves. Yes, the system tends to pat them aside, but I tell you something that I've seen. When they need honest people to get the job done, they still look for those kind of people in the system. So when I joke with my friends, I say, even as corrupt as we all like to paint our country, even though I don't think it's as corrupt as it is, as we paint it, there's still honor among thieves. The critical challenge is, how do we create a system to reward and to promote those kind of behaviors? We were not like this at the start of this federation, or whatever we call ourselves now, right? It took us time to get there. So it means it can be changed. So what do I say to people who say, how do you then build resilience? I wouldn't start for them from resilience. I would say you've got to demonstrate over time a track record that this is who you are and you will not be compromised. You also need to recognize what are the key incentives that drives corruption and plug those holes. Yes. That's the leader who wants to institute that. I know of the fact that in this country, there are still people leading in our public sphere that everybody who walks around them will say, if it is him, don't go there with that thing. They would rather find other ways to get things done. Sometimes those leaders then tend to look away because either they don't want to be whacked off or they don't want to be tossed off the and they still want to contribute to the system. So it's a challenge. They seem to be in the minority, but they do exist. All right. So the challenge is to figure out how to bring them out and to help them. Now, do they need to be resilient? Yes, because that's the only way we're going to save the system. And being resilient means understanding the system, finding the right levers within the system to prevent some of these things from happening or the scale that which they're happening.
So, sir, as we're speaking about leadership, is there an empathy deficit in society as a whole? And we do identify that good leaders are empathetic leaders. They're able to feel the pulse of their followers. They're able to understand what their needs are. And with the cry of our leaders, we're hungry, we're being power, and this is across different regimes over the last 20, 30 years. Is there, and this brings me into empathy linked to communication, is there some kind of disconnect between how the leaders lead and what the followers are receiving? So is that a communication problem where Nigerians don't simply understand the kind of leaders that they have, or the leaders understand, but they're just not empathetic?
Okay. Just so I understand you, you are asking what's the place of empathy in leadership?
Yes.
And how come we don't seem to experience empathy from our leaders,
yes.
right?
And is it a communication problem?
Okay. So, leadership scholarship will tell you empathy is part of what a leader should bring to the table, right? And so what's empathy? Empathy is the ability to understand the situation that this person or these persons are going through, connect with their reality, and be able to help to bring them to a better condition around that. Again, I keep going back to the fact that we're doing a very poor job of leadership development, leader formation, as well as development. Because the leaders we are talking about today, they didn't come from Mars, right?
Yeah.
They grew from our societies. They saw part of what I call the culturally acceptable behaviors that leaders must demonstrate. And that's what they just more or less follow, without oftentimes trying to check how that impacts on and without holding forth for them. I can empathize with them. Okay. Is there a communication problem? Absolutely. Because the people oftentimes feel left behind. But again, I go back to that thing I said about maybe we spend some time to define what leadership is, right? Leadership is about different things to different people. Some will tell you, current leadership is what we need. Oh, transformational leadership is what we need. It doesn't even carry us along, right? So there are many strands of leadership and how people define it. But essentially at its core, leadership is that ability, right, to influence people, to achieve a common goal in the most, let me say, ethical way. All right? And so it's all about people. Leadership is a contact sport. You can't do it all by yourself. So when you talk about empathy in leadership and being able to recognize the needs of these people, empathy on its own is a completely different study because at least the last time I checked, you can find like 3 levels at which you demonstrate empathy. There's cognitive empathy, there's compassionate empathy, and there is emotional empathy. So empathy scholars will also disaggregate that. So which one are they missing? So cognitive empathy is you recognizing their needs exists. Compassionate empathy is immersing yourself a little bit to show something to what you've recognized. And then emotional empathy is to treat their feelings and actually understand those feelings for what it is and acknowledge it. And knowing all of those three, bringing all those three elements together is work. Leadership is work.
My goodness.
So understanding all of that and using that to frame conversation and demonstrate empathy in how you lead its work. So leadership is not something that because you've been named a leader or you won an election suddenly. And I'm not saying that they're doing, they don't recognize it. It's just that the discipline to get it done can be lacking or can be underdeveloped in some of them. All right. But again, you can't take away the fact that the society, I keep talking about the culture, right? So in leadership scholarship, again, there's something we call culturally implicit acceptable behavior.
Okay.
This is how we expect you to show up as a leader. So because of and when I look at Nigeria, because of history with the military for 20-something years, we tended to be conditioned in certain ways around leaders. And so you expect your leaders as a country sometimes to be benevolent dictators. And so when people get into position of authority, they carry that toga of being some form of, although most of them that we've seen are malevolent dictators, right? Where, again, when I talk about culture, the average Nigerian, something happens between us on the road, I don't know, Feranmi, the first thing that most people say, do you know who I am? When you hear that, that tells, and that happens at all levels of our society. That tells you where this person comes from in terms of their empathy. And they are willing to share where they come from. Who do you think I am? And that's why you can find, for instance, one of the elected members the other day saying he's going to make somebody disappear and nothing will happen. And nothing has happened. So when you hear all of those, they come from a place where within society, there's a lot that needs to be unpacked. And it's not just about that person. It's been socialized in a certain way. So it takes conscious efforts to lead differently in this kind of context.
Amazing. It takes conscious effort to live differently in this kind of context. I think we'll take that away, that leadership will not happen by chance. You won't stumble into it, but it takes a conscious, concerted effort to become the leader that you desire. And so my final two questions. One would be around innovation.
Okay.
We're in a world where, we hear innovate. So how can innovation help to make us better leaders?
So again, you're touching on so many of the topics that are very dear to me. Innovation, as you know, is part of what I specialize in, teach, and to also help individuals and organizations improve how they innovate. We use that word a lot loosely, especially in our context, without recognizing that innovation requires discipline, and that discipline is what leads to better execution. So, should leaders lead innovation? Yes. Part of their toolkit should include that. Is that what we need? Absolutely, yes. Because innovation, essentially, when we define it, is doing new things in new ways, right? And capturing value for those things. And that's the point that we often miss in this part of the world. So you try to do a lot of things in new ways, but are you capturing value? Is it creating new value? That value could be in naira and kobo, it could be in efficiencies. Are you capturing the value? That's where we oftentimes miss it. So for leaders who will lead innovation well, you not only create new value, you capture the value.
Thank you.
And it requires a discipline on its own. It requires, just like leadership, to be taught. How do you innovate? Innovation is more than just having a few bright ideas from time to time. It's about creating and capturing new value in new ways.
Thank you very much, sir. So finally, and this podcast is because we do have a lot of young listeners. How can we empower young people in this day and age to become better leaders? As you said, there's a lack of role models, or there are poor role models, and there are all the challenges too, and then all the academic things that make leadership a bit so complex. People don't really understand. What would you say, by way of advice or encouragement, people who want to be leaders, who want to take up leadership positions, but are either tainted by what leadership already looks like or are unsure on what it really means? So what would you say to young people?
All right. Like I said, leadership is a contact sport. They can take baby steps in the environments that they find themselves. Their knowledge has been democratized with the internet. You could learn about how to be effective leaders. They could also get books like, Lead Disruption, read, understand basic things about what it takes to lead. Again, leadership is not about position. You can lead where you don't have a title. You can lead where you don't have a role. Being able to self-lead effectively is the highest form of leadership. And that's where true leadership happens. So for young people who are trying to say, also, how do I become an effective leader? You could find there are a lot of free opportunities to learn about leadership. YouTube is your friend. Google is your friend. In the age of AI, you could also find information or to check it. Be sure it's correct. Right. But so in my day, one of the things that I invested a lot in is autobiographies of great leaders. Read about them. There is nothing you're facing today. The world has never been better in goals than it is. Human societies have always evolved in cycles. And so leaders have faced everything that you're going to face. There's nothing new under the sun. So investing in those kind of leadership development, even when you probably have no resources to go to a big seminar or to attend some leadership development somewhere, read books. Instead of spending time just watching reels, download stuff that is educational, informative about leadership. And when I talk leadership, I'm saying important things around self-awareness, building personal resilience. How do you communicate as a leader? How do you network? How do you engage? How do you influence people? There are lots of books on those kind of topics. Investing in those helps. And then you can see when things go wrong around you, you can know that this is not supposed to be like this. And you can also now stand up and take corrective action where you can until you have the capacity to extend your influence beyond a certain scope. And that's how leaders grow.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Akin. And thank you so much to our listeners. For those who are at this point asking how they can get a copy of Lead Disruption, or if Easy Data has any leadership programs coming forward, can you tell us a bit about what's sort of next for Leadership Express at Easy Data, and how people can contact you, reach out, or the book?
So there's quite a lot that we're doing in this season. In April 18th, for instance, we're having a webinar on one of our programs, which is the Certified Innovation Professional Program. That is a global certification that we are the licensee for Nigeria to train people to become professionals at being able to innovate well, right? In addition to that, we also hold quarterly events called innovation cafes, where we bring people who have roles around innovation in organizations, mid to senior career executives, to come and talk about their innovation pain points and exchange ideas amongst themselves. That's an invitation-only event that we hold monthly with senior leaders in organizations talk about innovation. And we also have a coaching program for leaders and leadership. The High Impact Leadership Program on our website, Leadership Express, the link. You can always register for that. We have a rolling registration program, and we hold the High Impact Leadership Program every quarter, where 2-3 days of high impact leadership development. You've been a part of that.
I have.
And that's something that we do on a quarterly basis, but we take registrations on a rolling basis. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much. And thank you for your time. Thank you to all our listeners. We hope that you have learned what it means to be a good leader or even an ethical leader by listening to this podcast. By no means is this conversation all encompassing. There's a lot more to learn about leadership and what it means to be an ethically driven leader. I would recommend that you read Lead Disruption. I've also been part of the impact leadership program. So these are things that you can take advantage of. Dr. Akin has mentioned their website is leadershipexpress.com. And you can also find them on social media. Dr. Akin himself is on social media. And do not forget to follow Step Up Nigeria. We are step_up_Nigeria on Twitter and on Instagram. On Facebook, we are Step Up Nigeria. And on LinkedIn, we are Step Up for Social Development and Empowerment in Nigeria. My name is Feranmi Iyanda. I've been the host of your podcast. And I hope you've enjoyed this episode of our podcast. Do not forget, leadership is not something that you stumble into. It's not something that you get by chance. It's something you get from a conscious, active effort to becoming a better, more resilient, more self-aware, more empathetic, more ethical version of yourself as you influence others to achieve a certain goal. So thank you for listening. See you on the next episode. Thank you, sir.
Bye.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.